David, stop staring at me that way. As Colleen prepared to go on her date, she said, it's very common for women in their 40s to take on a younger lover, and almost as common for those women to get divorced. David watched his wife and muttered to himself from the corner chair. You're not going to divorce me, David, she replied. I'm not? Could you please explain my reasoning for that decision? David sarcastically said, because you love me, but she ignored him. You are aware of my love for you even in spite of my plans for the evening. You understand that this is nothing more than a distraction from our shared life. You wouldn't abandon our lifelong commitment for something so insignificant. Gee, that's damn considerate of me. Oh, please give up. Every woman in my social group has a partner. I am the final person. Every single one of them. Even the conceited Joan Bennett has a partner. She actually does, in fact. Actually, it was her second. Wendell understands it very well, the woman remarked. Yes, he is. Does it matter to him what she does? He has been mistreating his assistant for years, as everyone is aware. Observe? And they remain contentedly wed. Yes, I'm married. The sound of the doorbell interrupted him, happily. I'm not ready yet, damn it. Could you please open the door? She was so focused on her makeup that she didn't notice that David was staring at her like she was crazy. In actuality, I wouldn't mind. To be honest, I find it disgusting and offensive that you would even ask your spouse to let your boyfriend in. After saying that, David pivoted quickly and proceeded down their one-story house's hallway. He took a seat in his office and remained motionless. Wearing only her stocking feet, Colleen approached the front door and opened it for the dapper 32-year-old man who would be her date for the evening. Hi, Ryan. I apologize, but I'm still not ready. I fear my spouse is proving to be more challenging than I had anticipated in this regard. Colleen, no issue. You are undoubtedly worth the wait. Here, I'll wait. I'm grateful, Ryan. I'll respond as soon as I can. The glare from the hallway light illuminated the home office just enough for her to see her husband sitting in his chair and staring into the dark as she marched up the hallway to open the door. Just to be clear, we are not dating. Never in my life have I referred to someone as my boyfriend before the third date. I married you, but not even you. Unfortunately, David murmured, though not quite silently. David, you know I don't like that. I've been your devoted wife for more than 20 years. I've cooked for you practically every night and taken care of your house. I've done an excellent job as your wife and have been by your side for every social function that your company has needed. I believe I've earned the right to somewhat extend my wings. It's not your wings I'm worried about you spreading. Let's discuss this in more detail later. Honey, please try to understand that this has nothing to do with my love for you. After shutting the office door, Colleen headed back up the hallway to complete her preparations. David kept sitting in the shadows. No, it's about how much you value me, he said, addressing the void. When Ryan began making advances on Colleen, nobody was more shocked than Colleen herself. Every morning, she would make a coffee stop at the Starbucks located on the ground floor of her office building. That was, after all, the building where Wendell's company occupied an office previously occupied by her friend, the aforementioned Joan Bennett. She came here almost every day with her friends to talk and do any business pertaining to the non-profit they assisted in running, but mostly just to catch up. In addition to the publicity it brought them and their husbands' businesses, they did it to stay occupied. David, like the other husbands, ran his own profitable business and earned more than enough to support them, especially since they didn't have kids. When Ryan stopped, too, she ran into him more than once. He was on a different floor, but still in the same building. He resembled David in that he was youthful and full of energy. She didn't hold her spouse responsible for this. After all, Ryan was 13 years his junior, but she enjoyed feeling young again when she spent time with him. Although they hadn't gone on any dates specifically, they had sat and enjoyed coffee together on a few occasions when they happened to be together. His flirting with her had taken her by surprise, and her surprise was doubled when she returned the favor. Seemingly interpreting that as a sign of her interest, he finally proposed that they sit down to dinner one evening. Ryan dismissed Colleen's plea that she was married. "Your ring finger isn't the part of your body I'm interested in." Something ignited inside her at his interest in her. She started having fantasies about him and acting as though he was sleeping in her bed rather than David. After confiding in her friends, she was shocked to learn that every single one of the 4 other women in her close social circle had a young partner. Though her friends were unaware of her true intentions, that was the final barrier she managed to break down. She told Ryan she would be game for a date the next time she saw him, and they set a date for tonight. Ryan never brought up her marriage, presumably assuming Colleen already had or would take care of that. For her part, Colleen didn't really think about her spouse either. She thought he loved her enough to understand that this would not affect their marriage and that he would accept it. Ryan came to get her tonight in a late-model Mercedes. Although her knowledge of automobiles was limited, she was able to identify style and was undoubtedly familiar with the Mercedes logo. She had become used to the finer things in life after marrying David, and she had no intention of settling for anything less from her partner. She waited patiently at the restaurant while Ryan came to escort her inside after tipping the valet. He was very attractive, bringing to mind the younger version of her husband. David's physique had changed, and his hair had turned slightly grey, but her own body had grown larger. That was all to be expected. "Colleen, I'm so happy you decided to go out with me. You're a really stunning woman." "I'm grateful, Ryan. It's flattering that you are paying attention to me. But I really hope I didn't give you the wrong idea. I'm in love with my husband and I don't plan on splitting up. You shouldn't anticipate that we'll get personal tonight either. All I expected tonight was an evening out with a beautiful, intelligent, sophisticated woman, and I already have that." That the evening would go smoothly was not surprising. Their visits for coffee in the morning had established their compatibility. In actuality, Colleen's personal boundaries were the only thing preventing them from ripping the sheets off of Ryan's bed. Without a doubt, she desired to have sex with him. They visited a nearby jazz club with a well-liked dance floor after supper. They alternated between sitting at their table and dancing all evening. Ryan was such a gentleman on the dance floor, putting one hand in hers and the other on the small of her back. He didn't try to get particularly close to her or make sure she experienced his erection. Ryan put his hand on Colleen's thigh as they sat at the table, and she did not try to take it off. He grew more confident as the evening went on, reaching higher and higher up Colleen's exposed thigh with his hand. When it finally reached a certain height, Colleen put her own hand over his to stop it from rising any higher, but she didn't take it off. At around midnight, they exited the club and got into his vehicle. Neither did Colleen expect him to start the engine right away, nor did he. She leaned into him as he wrapped his arm around her. Making out was definitely on the menu, even though she had never slept with a guy on their first date. For the next 10 minutes, she and Ryan did just that. When the clinch broke, she said, "I should be heading home." "When can I see you again?" Ryan queried. "I am unable to see you every day. Maybe on Sunday." "Are you a fan of ballet?" "My cousin is a theatre employee, so she can quickly obtain me excellent tickets. I would really like to go, but I have never been. I'll meet you. David isn't really into the artsy stuff, but I think it was a mistake to have you pick me up at home." "When should I arrive there?" "The show is in the afternoon. Let's schedule lunch in advance, so let's say 11 a.m. After making plans, they returned by car to Colleen and David's home. Before exiting the car and bracing herself to confront her husband, she quickly planted another kiss on Ryan. She pictured him waiting in the living room, poised for a confrontation, or perhaps still stewing in his office chair. He might have even gone so far as to move his belongings into the spare room to make a statement. Either way, she was prepared. She didn't anticipate, or wasn't prepared for, the fact that he would be soundly asleep in their bed. As she was considering her options, she entered the bathroom and took off her makeup. Was there a sign of acceptance of the situation in the sound sleep? Is it better to talk to him when she wakes up, or should she wait until morning? She was scared to leave it alone, thinking he would disappear in the morning and prevent her from speaking to him. Now that he was here, at least. "David," she uttered. He stirred, but did not awaken. "David, did you want to talk?" "No, I want to sleep." "Okay, I guess I'll get ready for bed." Colleen reached into her closet and pulled out one of her more sober pajamas. He said, "To be honest, I do have a question." She came out of the wardrobe. She desired for David to understand that she would be there for him at all times. "Okay. Did you have sex with him?" "David, no. It was merely a date. I've never slept with a man after just one date." "You are aware of that?" "Yes, but I thought maybe the process had changed since you're just trying out for a sex buddy this time rather than a possible husband. Do you intend to see him once more?" She paused before answering. "We're going to the ballet on Sunday afternoon and having lunch beforehand. You're seeing him on Friday night and now Sunday afternoon, which is when we usually spend time together. This shouldn't affect us." "Interesting." She began, "David, these are the only times I can see him," only to realize that he had likely fallen back asleep and wasn't even paying attention. She went back to her closet and put on her bedclothes. Since her friends' husbands had seemed to support this, she had sincerely hoped that David would too. It was a well-known fact that men's performance diminished with age. It would seem that men would be more appreciative of women meeting those needs and would want the happiness of the woman they loved. It was just sex, to use a corny expression. When Colleen awoke the following morning, she was not in the slightest surprised that David had disappeared. She anticipated that they would need to go through an adjustment period based on his response. With the intention of spending the day with David, she had scheduled her next date with Ryan for Sunday, so she hoped he wouldn't be gone for too long. But as the morning wore on into the afternoon, she came to the realization that, given his frequent need to work on Saturdays, she was probably being avoided by him. She realized that he could have gone to the office to finish his work and stay away from her. She resolved to find him there, figuring that he wouldn't pick up at his office or cell phone. When she finally arrived at the parking lot, she was not at all shocked to see David's car parked in the spot he had reserved. Although she had signed in at the security desk numerous times and the guards recognized her immediately, she was still expected to abide by the rules in the same way as everyone else. Like she had many times before, she rode the elevator to the 7th floor and proceeded to David's office. "Hello, David. Oscar informed me that you were on your way up, Colleen. What are your desires?" "To be with my spouse more often." "Is your boyfriend really busy today?" "David, stop acting like a child. In my life, you have never been the only one. During the week, I see my friends every day. Unless you're having sex with them, it's not really the same thing. I apologize that you're finding this so challenging, David. I have made an effort to reassure you that our marriage and my feelings for you will remain unaffected by anything I do with anyone else. I hope we have a long life together because I love you with all of my heart." "So, Colleen, why are you acting in this way? Is causing me intentional pain a way for you to show me that you care? I think you're being really self-centered." "David, I could say the same thing. Ultimately, my friendship with the women has no greater impact on our marriage than my relationship with him. I therefore fail to see why you are objecting with such vehemence." "Can't even say his name, Colleen? I want to avoid upsetting you more than is absolutely necessary. Keeping him anonymous seems like it would be less damaging." "I see. You know, you and John Doe went out last night and are going out again tomorrow, but I can't remember the last time you and one of the charity ladies went on a date. He appears to be considerably more significant than they are. These are the only opportunities one have to get to know him, as I attempted to convey to you last night. Even in college, you know that I've never just jumped into bed with someone. Once we progress past the getting to know you stage and onto the screwing stage," David said. "All right, if you have to be that obscene about it. Then I'll make sure to handle that tactfully so you won't know exactly when it occurs and I'll keep it apart from our regular time together. Well, you'll at least be a subdued 304. Is there anything more?" Although Colleen winced at the taunts, she decided not to raise an objection just yet. It didn't seem like he was ready to upset anyone, and he appeared to be accepting this. I had hoped we would spend the day together. Yes, well, I'm always in the office all day on the Saturday before to compile the data because, as I reminded you last week, and you should know anyway, the quarterly reports are due next week. As is customary, I had thought that we would spend time together on Friday night and Sunday, but it seems that I have become less important. Oh, I apologize, David. I suppose I simply forgot with everything going on. Anyhow, I have work to do, so it's not that important. It does matter, at least to me. Okay, then how about we take off tonight after I finish and drive out to the coast? I can make reservations at Deo and we can make a day of it tomorrow. Well, the ballet tickets are already paid for. I got a text earlier. I'd feel awfully bad cancelling at this point. That's okay, Colleen. I didn't really expect you to say yes. I knew you wouldn't give him up for me. You can leave now. David turned back to his work, and she knew he had already stopped listening. She sighed deeply and left his office. She had really hoped this would go better. She had expected David to be upset at first, but had thought he'd eventually be glad that she was happy and would accept her assurances that she would always be there for him. At least she would be after this brief period of getting to know Ryan a little better. Her plan, which she had already communicated to Ryan, was to spend a few dates getting to know him better in a more personal environment than the coffee shop. She figured 5 dates would be enough to make sure she was comfortable making love to him. After that, she really only expected to meet him for sex and morning coffee, and she intended to do that only during the day or when David was unavailable. She really didn't want this to interfere with her marriage, but she did really want this. As was usual on the Saturday before quarterly reports, David did not come home until nearly midnight. Colleen wondered how he had intended to complete the data collection and still make the trip he suggested, but realized he knew he wouldn't need to. He even said he knew she'd choose Ryan, but it really wouldn't have been right to break a date she had committed to for a plan made up on the spot. Colleen was hoping that David might be feeling amorous this evening. He often enjoyed low-key intimacy when coming home after long days like these. He said it allowed him to wind down and remember why he was working so hard. Sometimes they'd end up having sex. She was happy to do it because she loved him so much. She was starting to get tired when she heard the garage door opener. She perked herself up and waited for her husband to walk into the bedroom. She was naked, though covered with the comforter, her bare shoulders seductively visible. "How was work, honey?" "Same as usual, but I got all the data compiled and sorted so the reporting next week should go smoothly." He began undressing while standing in the bedroom, but when it came time to strip down nude, he went into the bathroom, which was a first. But the shower turned on, so Colleen was hopeful their routine was going forward. Those hopes took a hit when David emerged wearing his usual shorts. Colleen took this opportunity to lower the comforter and reveal herself. "My darling, I thought perhaps we could reconnect tonight." "You sure your boyfriend wouldn't mind?" David replied. "Comments like that aren't helpful. Can't we just enjoy ourselves tonight as husband and wife, man and woman, and lovers without concerning ourselves with anyone else?" David was clearly conflicted. Despite her choices, he still loved her, and she never failed to arouse him. He believed that she was telling the truth about not having sex with this guy yet, but he recalled the make-out sessions they had started on their first date and assumed she had stayed true to form. He realized about the only hope he had was to give her his all and convince her not to go through with this, because once she had sex with him for the first time, he had no intention of touching her again. He dropped his shorts to the floor, to the appreciative smile of his wife. Colleen spent the next 2 hours using her lush body to please her husband and was delighted that he responded in kind with enthusiasm. She hoped that her husband would see that she was more than capable of fully pleasing him while seeking her own additional satisfaction with Ryan. He was hoping that she would be sufficiently sated to abandon her plans to take a lover. They languished in bed the next morning. David was consciously trying to keep her there, hoping that she would be reticent to leave his bed to meet her paramour. He cuddled, nuzzled, and kissed her, expressing his love for her as best he could. As the time grew later, he could sense her unease and knew his plan was having an effect. He allowed himself to get a little hopeful, but at 10 o'clock, Colleen extracted herself from his embrace. "I'm sorry, David, I have to get ready." His plan had failed. She chose her boyfriend over him again. "Sure." He swung his legs off the bed and pulled his shorts on, making a concerted effort at modesty. It was odd, but the idea of his wife, who had seen him naked thousands of times, seeing him naked as she was going to get ready to meet her lover was particularly offensive to him. He walked out of the bedroom without another look at her. Colleen watched her husband leave the room with feelings of sorrow. She had enjoyed cuddling with him that morning, as she always had, and had stayed as long as she could. It was with significant reluctance that she climbed out of bed to shower and get ready to meet Ryan. She certainly couldn't go meet him with the smell of sex with her husband on her. That would be rude and disrespectful, just as coming to her husband after being with Ryan in the future would be. She pondered the situation as the water cascaded over her, trying desperately to think of ways to minimize the hurt that David was feeling. She could think of nothing but ending the idea of taking a lover entirely, and that wasn't an option as far as she was concerned. She put on a modest but alluring dress with stockings, garter belts, and a matching bra and panty set. She had no intention of allowing Ryan to see any of her underthings, but wearing them made her feel sexy. She had to hurry as it was almost time to leave. She called David's name as she walked through the house, hoping to say goodbye and again reassure him of her love for him, but there was no answer. She checked his office, and he wasn't there. It was when she looked into the garage and saw their classic 1968 Mustang convertible gone that she realized he had left without another word. She sighed deeply once again, then locked up the house and drove to the restaurant. She was so intent on meeting Ryan that she never noticed the nondescript sedan that took up behind her as she left their neighborhood. Ryan was waiting for her outside, and she apologized for arriving a few minutes late. He gave her a kiss on the cheek and assured her it was no problem. They were seated quickly, and all thoughts of David were lost with her being in the presence of this young and handsome man. The lunch conversation was plentiful, and she enjoyed herself immensely as she always had with Ryan. The food was excellent, and she allowed just one thought of her husband to creep in as she wondered if it would be inappropriate to suggest they dine here sometime in the future, as they had never been. The ballet was beautiful, and she was surprised at Ryan's knowledge of the art. He explained the story to her and how certain movements had certain meanings. He was so different from David in so many ways, and she was aware of all the experiences she'd not had as a result. It wasn't intended as a criticism of David, after all, no one can be into everything. But it made her aware of how much they complemented each other. She figured that most anything she wanted to try would appeal to at least one of them. If she could somehow get David on board with this, Ryan might even be more than just a physical dalliance. After the ballet, they took a short drive up into the local hill country. Ryan took them to a small overlook that provided a magnificent view of the city skyline. Colleen imagined she was not the first woman he had brought up here, but she knew he had a history, so she took no offense. She also knew precisely why he had brought her up here. "You're such a beautiful woman, Colleen. I feel lucky that you're here with me." "Then I guess we're both lucky, Ryan." The making out began in earnest. The lust she felt for this virile young man was making her head swim, and she wondered if she'd be able to hold out until the fifth date. She pulled him closer, and the kissing intensified. She knew that if she took even one step, she probably wouldn't be able to bring herself to stop until she went all the way, so again she reluctantly pulled away. Ryan was noticeably disappointed. "I'm sorry, Ryan. I want to, I really do, but I've told you that I have certain boundaries." "I know, Colleen. I understand that you want to be comfortable for us to go farther, and you've said a number of dates. I feel like all the times we met for coffee should give me some kind of credit toward that. I hadn't considered that. We did spend an awful lot of time getting to know each other before our first official date. Perhaps I'm being unnecessarily rigid about this," she mused. Really, it was just the excuse she had been looking for to move her timetable up. "When can you arrange a long lunch?" she asked, her meaning clear. Mondays are far too busy, but Tuesday can easily be arranged. I must have time to clean up before I go home, so please plan accordingly. I'll bring the necessary supplies. I'll let you know the details tomorrow morning at Starbucks. Ryan started the car and drove back to the restaurant parking lot where Colleen's car had been left. It was nearly 6:30 p.m. when she finally pulled into her driveway. She was practically floating on air as she walked into the empty house. She quickly checked her phone for a message from David, but there was none. She moved quickly into her bedroom, keeping an ear out for the garage door opener. She changed into her evening loungewear when she heard the garage door opener indicating David was home. She went immediately to the kitchen and prepared to start dinner. She had become quite good at preparing meals quickly since David's schedule was so erratic. She was already pulling things from the refrigerator when David came in from the garage. "Hi honey, have a good drive?" It was fine. She went to kiss him, but he deflected it to his cheek, obviously still upset that she had left his bed this morning to meet Ryan. At least he was still speaking to her, even if it was with short sentences. She had held out hope that last night's lovemaking would make a difference, but it appeared leaving his bed had drained all of the goodwill. She noticed he didn't ask about her day. "Dinner will be about 20 minutes. "That's fine. I'll be in the office." Colleen put together a quick teriyaki stir-fry with rice and called David to dinner. He washed his hands and then joined her at the table. She tried making conversation. "Where do you drive today?" "Nowhere in particular. I just got on the highway and drove." "Did you stop anywhere?" "There was a small deli just off the freeway where I had lunch. I got out a few times to stretch my legs, that's about it." Colleen tried to talk about her day, but David put a quick stop to that. "The ballet. I have no interest in your date, Colleen. This isn't about that, I was just..." "Not another damn word about it. I just wanted..." With that, David got up, leaving his meal half-eaten. He walked down the hall and went into his office without another word. Colleen sat for several minutes, then got up to clear the table. I guess that was a bad idea, she thought. She packaged up the leftovers so David could take them to work for lunch if he wished. He had always complimented her cooking. She spent the evening straightening the house, hoping that David would at some point emerge from his office and they could spend time together. She also hoped to somehow make the evening a little less disastrous than it had turned out to be. She had only intended to tell him about the beauty of the ballet and see if possibly it would be something he might like to experience in the future. It had nothing to do with Ryan directly, but apparently David was unable to separate the two. She went into her bedroom and prepared for bed, then climbed under the covers and began reading her book. She continued to hope that David would join her, but as midnight approached, she assumed he was hoping she would fall asleep before he went to bed. She didn't intend to make it that easy for him. She walked down the hall to his office. "Are you coming to bed?" "Eventually. I have some things I want to finish. Please, David, come to bed and lay beside me. Make love to me if you want, or cuddle with me if that's all you want, or even just lay there quietly, but please don't avoid me. I just told you, Colleen, that I have things to finish. If your guilty conscience is interpreting that as my avoiding you, there's nothing I can do about it. The sooner I finish, the sooner I can get in bed, so if you'll excuse me." Colleen reluctantly closed the door and returned to bed. She had lost her interest in reading and again slid between the covers. Was it possible she was subconsciously feeling guilty and interpreting his actions through that lens? She dismissed that idea quickly, however. She knew in her mind and heart that she was doing nothing wrong. Her love for her husband was completely intact. No, whatever the issue was, it certainly wasn't that. She still believed David was purposely avoiding her, but not wanting to exacerbate the issue any further, she clicked off the light and closed her eyes. Sleep came quickly. She awoke the next morning alone in bed, and a search of the house found that David had already left for work. She had no idea whether he had ever come to their bed last night. Frankly, she was growing tired of his attitude. She had done her very best to assure him nothing in their marriage would change, but he was intent on being hurt and allowing those feelings to rule the day. Well, no more. She would proceed with her plans with Ryan and continue to be David's loving wife, but she was going to stop begging him to be her husband. She dressed as usual and went to meet her friends, with her regular stop at Starbucks on the agenda as well. She wasn't surprised to see Ryan sitting at a table in the corner, and their eyes met almost immediately. She purchased her coffee, then joined him. They resisted any public displays of affection. "I couldn't stop thinking about you last night, Colleen." "Likewise, Ryan. I'm looking forward to tomorrow." He passed a small note to her. "Here's the information for tomorrow. My condo is some distance from here, but I still thought that would be preferable to a hotel if that's all right with you. More privacy that way and no risk of someone seeing us checking in. Thank you for your discretion, Ryan. I have no desire to hurt my husband any further than he already is." "Of course." They chatted a bit more before Ryan needed to excuse himself to a busy day at work, and Colleen headed up to meet with Joan, Marge, Ellen, and Gail. Despite her awareness that each of her friends had young lovers, she hadn't told them of her actual plans to take one herself and had no intention of doing so for fear of it becoming public and somehow hurting David. No, this was something to be kept private. That night, she was delighted that David greeted her with some enthusiasm and joined her for dinner. The conversation flowed well, the topic of her lover steered clear by both of them. Colleen found it to be extremely satisfying and hoped that it meant David was beginning to understand that her being with Ryan would have absolutely no effect on them. She didn't see it for the attempt to dissuade her from taking a lover at all that it actually was. It was with significant anticipation that Colleen arrived at the doorstep of Ryan's condo. He opened the door before she could even knock and pulled her inside. The door was barely closed before Ryan had his arms around her and his lips finding hers. She responded with equal enthusiasm. They were both so eager to finally experience the other that foreplay was entirely unnecessary, so they skipped it. Within just a couple of minutes of walking through his door, Colleen was on her back, having sex with a man other than her husband for the first time in 25 years, and she was begging him to do it harder. In fact, it seemed almost like the entire experience was one long extended climax. They relaxed in each other's arms on Ryan's bed. "That was amazing, Ryan. Better than your husband?" Colleen sat up and looked her lover in the eye. "My husband is strictly off limits, Ryan. He is a wonderful lover, and I'm not here because of any shortcomings on his part. If you're going to try and turn this into some macho dick measuring contest, then I'm going to leave now, and it'll be the last time this happens. Am I clear?" "Of course, I meant nothing by it. I was only concerned about your satisfaction." She settled back into his arms. "It was very good. I enjoy being with you immensely and look forward to more." They spent the next 2+ hours coupling in a more loving manner than their initial hormone-driven sex session. Colleen appreciated that Ryan was very capable of both and was responsive to her direction on what she wanted and how she wanted it. That was no different than David, and yet it was. Ryan, for his part, enjoyed Colleen's plentiful flesh. He had long enjoyed women who were older and a little on the plump side, and Colleen fit the bill nicely. He could see them enjoying a long, mutually beneficial relationship. She had no interest in leaving her husband, and he had no interest in marrying at all. He had tried living with girlfriends in the past, and it usually led to the end of things. He simply couldn't abide having someone in his space all the time. Yes, an older married woman was perfect. A glance at the clock revealed that they had been at it for nearly 3 hours, so Colleen excused herself to the shower to get cleaned up. She had purchased the same soap and shampoo she had at home, as well as some feminine hygiene items, so she could clean things up. She would just leave these things at Ryan's condo so they'd be available as needed. Finally, with one last long, deep kiss, they said their goodbyes, and Colleen made the drive back to her home while Ryan returned to work. Colleen managed to calm herself as she waited for her husband to come home. She must have checked herself in the mirror 100 times to make sure nothing was out of place. if David didn't know when or even if she was meeting Ryan, it would go a long way toward smoothing things over. David walked through the door at 7:11 p.m., and Colleen greeted him warmly, wrapping her arms around him and kissing him on the cheek. David seemed to respond at first, but then his arms dropped and she could feel his body slump. She pulled away, concern on her face. "David, you had sex with him today, didn't you?" "What?" "David, I don't. What makes you say that?" "You're a creature of habit, Colleen, and I know those habits better than anyone. Back when we were younger and more active, a shower in the middle of the day wouldn't have been unusual, but that hasn't happened in the last few years unless it was for a particular reason. Until today. The smell of your soap and shampoo," David continued, "hasn't been this strong at this time of day in years. All things considered, the only explanation is that you took a shower recently with the goal of washing off or covering up whatever it was after being with him. Granted, that's better than smelling the other, so I actually appreciate that, but all you did was telegraph exactly what you were trying to hide." "Excuse me." He pushed past her and went into the office. Damn it, she was sure that would work. She hadn't even considered the strength of the scent giving her away. She had hoped to do this without David knowing anything more than that it was simply going on sometime and somewhere, but she would have to rethink that now. Sighing, she managed to get herself together enough to start dinner. She kept it simple, making some broiled chicken breast with carrots and linguine noodles. She plated the food and set the table, then anxiously walked to the office. "David, dinner's ready." "I'm not hungry." "Honey, you need to eat." "I'm fine, thank you." "David, please, you have to take care of yourself, and I doubt you had anything healthy all day." "I was trying to be polite about this, but I can see that's not going to work." "Colleen, I have no interest in eating anything you cooked. I'll get myself something later. Now, if there's nothing else." Suddenly not hungry either, Colleen packed up the food as leftovers and stowed them in the refrigerator. She could always pass them on to some of the people in Joan's office if David continued to ignore them. Even though they were wealthy, she had grown up struggling and hated the idea of wasting food. Colleen spent the evening trying to come up with ways to see Ryan and still managed to keep it hidden from David. Even if he knew that it was happening, it was imperative that he not know when it was happening. Oddly, the one thing she never considered was simply not doing it at all. She again went to bed alone, finding falling asleep easier than expected, which she attributed to the complete satisfaction she got with Ryan earlier in the day. Even the stress of David realizing it had happened didn't prevent sleep from coming. She awoke around 4 a.m. and noticed David was not in bed. She was not surprised by that but was surprised to find him sleeping with his head on his desk. She shook him awake. David, honey, I know you're upset, but you can't sleep like this. Come to bed or go to the spare room if you don't want to be next to me. This is terrible for your back. I know you're angry with me, but that doesn't change that I love you and will try to take care of you. Please." David stirred awake, wiping the drool from his arm and mouth. He was disoriented, as often happens when one first awakens, and wasn't entirely sure that the events of earlier that evening weren't a nightmare. So, he allowed himself to be led down the hall to their bedroom. She began undressing him, and suddenly he remembered that it was all true. He interpreted her removing his clothes as an attempt to seduce him and started to put up resistance. "Stop, Colleen, stop." "David, I'm just trying to get you ready for bed. Please, stop. Just another couple of buttons." "Damn it, Colleen, get your filthy hands off of me." Colleen shrunk away. This wasn't the first time David had raised his voice, but she could probably count the number of times it had happened in the last 25 years on one hand. She sat at her vanity, struggling to hold back her tears and being mostly unsuccessful. "I'm sorry I raised my voice, Colleen, but you wouldn't stop. I was just trying to get you undressed for bed. I wasn't trying to do anything." "I know. I didn't like you touching me with hands that had been on another man's dick less than 24 hours ago." "David, that's okay. I guess I understand, but I really don't. I mean, I've showered since then and washed my hands several times, but I understand that it's more in your mind than anything. I'm sorry, David. I'll leave you to it. Colleen busied herself in other rooms of the house to allow David time to get himself into bed. Despite David's reaction, she really believed it was just a matter of waiting, and eventually, David would come to terms with this. So even as things seemed to be falling down around her, she never considered ending her relationship with Ryan. If anything, she considered it a test of her strength and resolve, and she was determined not to give up. After several minutes, she peeked into the bedroom and saw David was fast asleep. She returned to bed and slept well. The next day was Wednesday, and David worked late, or so he said, but at least he had the courtesy to let her know, even if it was via text instead of his usual phone call. She realized there was nothing she could do to help him work through this, at least nothing more than she had already done. She now knew what she needed to say the next time they spoke. Thursday morning had her buzzing with anticipation as she and Ryan had plans to meet again. They had met at Starbucks yesterday morning and discussed how often and on what days they would meet. Mondays were out because of Ryan's busy schedule, and Colleen was unwilling to do Fridays or weekends because she didn't want to infringe on any time David might want to spend with her. That left Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. They also didn't want to meet too many times, nor too close together, so they decided for now on Tuesdays and Thursdays at Ryan's condo. The meeting with her friend seemed like it was taking forever, and when it finally ended, she practically sprinted from the building. She had to make an effort to obey the speed limit to make sure she didn't get pulled over. She once read or heard that cheating sex was the best sex. She wasn't sure if it was that or the thrill of a new partner after so many years. She walked into Ryan's condo, the door having been unlocked as promised. Ryan was waiting on the bed, and just like last time, foreplay was not needed. She climbed on, and another spirited session lasting about 3 hours followed. It was fortunate that Ryan's schedule was flexible enough to allow them this time. While she would never admit it, she believed Ryan to be a better lover than David. This wasn't entirely a surprise. David was a faithful and dedicated husband, and he had geared his lovemaking to making her happy. Ryan, on the other hand, had been with many women and had the opportunity to learn different skills, which he brought to bed with Colleen. Eventually, it was time to leave and go back home. She checked her phone and found no messages, so she assumed David would be home around his usual time. As she dressed and then drove home, she considered what she intended to say to him tonight. She showered and cleansed herself thoroughly. She now knew this would be a tip-off to David, but she had a plan for that as well. She dressed in her usual loungewear and waited for David to arrive home. He walked in the door just before 7 p.m. "Good evening, honey. Colleen, will you be eating my cooking tonight, or should I just be concerned with myself?" "I'm fine. I grabbed something on the way home. You know you shouldn't eat fast food. It's so bad for you." "Yeah, well, I'll be in the office." "David, when you have a few minutes, there's something I'd like to talk to you about." "Okay," he replied as he continued down the hall and closed himself into his office. Colleen busied herself with some research for the upcoming fundraiser they were planning. But as the evening wore on, it became evident that David had no plans to initiate the conversation she had requested. She closed her laptop and walked to the office. "David, can we talk now?" "I suppose," he sighed. Colleen took a seat in the spare chair in the office. "Honey, despite what you may believe right now, I love you very much. I don't consider my new relationship to be of any consequence to our marriage, but I understand that you do. This is something that I believe I need, but it's also something that I want. I had hoped you would be more open and understanding, but it wasn't to be. What I want to say, David, is that I can be as patient as I need to be to allow you time to process this. I will still be here every evening and every weekend. I hope that we will spend time together and that we will make love as we always have, but if you prefer to spend the time ignoring me, well, then I guess I'll have to accept that. But I'll still be here, hoping we can find a way past this." "So you plan to keep screwing Ryan?" "Yes, wait, did you think it would be so hard for me to find out his name, Colleen?" "No, I guess I just thought you'd prefer not to know it." Also, David, I want to apologize for the situation on Tuesday where my midday shower made it clear that I had been intimate with Ryan that day. The last thing I want to do is make you aware of when I'm meeting him, so I'm going to start showering every weekday afternoon. I assure you I am not meeting him that often, but that way I will always be in roughly the same condition every day when you get home from work. I realize that's not perfect, but it's the only thing I can come up with right now. And this is your final decision on this matter, Colleen. There's nothing I can do or say to convince you to end your relationship with Ryan? I'm sorry, David, but no, there isn't. Well, I do appreciate your honesty, even if it isn't what I wanted to hear. I guess I just have to learn how to deal with it then. Is that all you wanted to say? Just that I love you, honey. I truly, truly do, and I hope that you can separate the love I feel for you from the physical need I have that Ryan fulfills. David smiled wryly and nodded his head. Colleen waited several more seconds to see if there was anything else her husband wanted to say, then left, quietly closing the door gently behind her when it became apparent there wasn't. She had been very anxious going into the conversation and wondered if she'd really be able to get through it. She was proud that she had managed and that it had gone so well. She just knew David would be able to see her point of view, especially when he realized just how important it was to her and how little it actually affected their lives together. True to her word, Colleen spent Friday evening and the entire weekend at home, with the exception of a few errands that needed to be run, but none of those took longer than an hour. She invited her husband to go with her, hoping his fears that this was an excuse to meet Ryan would be allayed, but he declined. They spoke as needed, and she didn't sense any hostility from David, but no love or affection from him either. She allowed that he was trying to find a new normal, and that would take time. She tried to initiate lovemaking on Saturday night, but David deflected all attempts, giving no reason. But Colleen knew what the reason was. She was not deterred, however, as she continued to believe it was all just a matter of time. There would be some rough spots ahead, but soon David would see that everything would be okay. Monday morning came, and David was gone early. Colleen suspected this would go on for a while, but that things would go back to normal. Showering in the middle of the day might prove to be inconvenient, but it was a small price to pay to soothe David's feelings. She met with her friends and listened to them talk about their exploits over the weekend with their young men. She had enjoyed these stories over the years, and as her friends were talking, she was reliving her time with Ryan in her mind. She could practically feel his presence, and she felt her heart rate rise. Gail noticed. "Are you all right, Colleen? You're getting a little red in the face." I'm fine, just a little warm is all," she said, taking a sip of her water. The moment seemed to pass. She tried to focus on the stories again, but couldn't seem to keep Ryan out of her mind. Concerned about giving herself away, she instead forced herself to think about other things and was pretty much successful. After a Monday night with David that was the same as the weekend, Colleen prepared for her Tuesday with Ryan. Ryan met her wearing a robe that quickly found its way to the floor and soon pounced on her. He had given her no choice and no warning, and she reveled in the feeling of being taken. They finally took a break about 90 minutes later. They were now relaxing in each other's arms. "I know your husband is off limits, Colleen, but I feel I should ask, how are things going at home? Do you feel as if you're in any danger?" "Thank you for your concern, Ryan, but David isn't like that at all. He's having some trouble adjusting, so things have been a little cold and distant lately. He seems to be avoiding me, though he denies it." "So you're still talking?" "Perhaps that's a good sign." "In short phrases and only as necessary. I've assured him I love him and made sure I was there for him. It's just going to take time for him to realize that you're no threat to our marriage." They spent another hour in more tender lovemaking before Colleen took her leave. She both bathed and showered to ensure all of her was clean and then sat down to read her book while she waited for David to come home or to send a message that he wasn't. He stepped through the door at 7:36 p.m. "Hi, honey. How was work?" "It was fine. Would you like dinner tonight?" "I had a late lunch." "I'm fine. Is there anything you'd like to talk about?" "No. I'll be in the office. Okay. I'll be here if you need me or want me, she added softly. The door closed gently, and Colleen again found herself alone in the living room. She wondered how much of David's time in the office was spent actually working and how much was spent simply avoiding her. Nevertheless, she was determined to stick to her plan to allow him his space and time to see how little this would affect them. She sat and took up her book again, confident she was doing the right thing. And so it went for the next several weeks. Colleen continued to meet Ryan every Tuesday and Thursday, and the sex continued to be amazing and intense. Evenings and weekends with David continued in the same vein. They were civil to each other, speaking to each other as needed. Colleen offered dinner every night, and every night David declined, using one reason or another. David spent most evenings in his office, and Colleen spent her time reading, working on her responsibilities for the charity, watching TV, or browsing the internet. While there were times when the loneliness seemed ready to overwhelm her, she clung to her belief that she could have both a loving, engaged husband and a dynamic, attentive lover. This belief gave her the strength to fight through the lonely moments. It went on for 3 months before Colleen finally noticed a change in her husband. While his schedule hadn't changed, he was actually coming home in a good mood, even if it was a little later than usual on many nights. They began having dinner together a couple of nights a week and sometimes spent time together watching an interesting program on TV or just sitting and reading. While they had not yet resumed their lovemaking, Colleen was certain this change in behavior signified a change in attitude on the part of her husband, so it was only a matter of time. However, another 3 months passed, and they seemed no closer to resuming physical intimacy. It was almost like their relationship had reached the status of roommates, maybe friends, but then stopped progressing. While she was glad things had progressed as far as they had, she was anxious for them to go even further. As marvelous as the sex was with Ryan, she didn't love him, and she craved the lovemaking she experienced with David. With Ryan, it was just sex, but with David, it was truly love, and she did miss it. She decided to address it directly that evening. David, I want you to know how much I appreciate your understanding regarding my relationship with Ryan. I know it hasn't been easy on you. Well, you left me little choice, Colleen. I know, and I'm sorry it came to that, but I'm still concerned about our lack of, well, any kind of sex life. You and I haven't made love since I first started seeing Ryan, and I miss it. I'm happy with how far things have come so far, but I'm wondering when we might take the next step. I suppose I haven't expressly told you this, Colleen, but I really have no intention of having sex with you. David, that's ridiculous. I always make sure I'm very clean for you. There's no reason at all for us to not have sex. I know you see it that way, but I don't. You made a choice and forced it on me. Don't forget, I too can make a choice and force it on you. With that final statement, David got up and went to get ready for bed. Colleen considered this turn of events. She hadn't expected David to simply cut them off. When they made love those 2 times when she first started seeing Ryan, she thought perhaps her having a lover would spur David on, give him something to compete against. That wasn't why she was doing this, but she considered that it might be the proverbial icing on the cake. The prospect of not making love to David when she had a lover was not a possibility she had even considered. But he couldn't hold out forever. She just had to have faith in her plan, and she was sure it would all work out. Colleen decided to ramp up the pressure a little bit, but indirectly. Thus far, she had been keeping a respectful distance and giving David a chance to come to terms with things, but that was based on her belief that he would eventually resume their own sex life. With his announcement that he planned to withhold his affection as long as Ryan was in the picture, her plans changed. She would turn up the tease factor. She would become more physical with him, like rubbing her body up against him. She would wear skimpy clothing to bed or maybe none at all. She had never been a nude sleeper, but that was about to change. Yes, she was going to make it very difficult for him to resist her, and as soon as he gave in once, there would be no reason for him to turn her down any longer. This plan couldn't fail. Except that it did. Over the next 2 months, Colleen did everything she could think of to entice her husband to sample her wares, and not only didn't he go for it, he didn't seem to be even close. Nothing worked. By the time she abandoned this part of her plan, it had been 8 months since they last made love. Her physical needs were certainly being taken care of by Ryan, but she was definitely missing the emotional needs that making love to David fulfilled and was becoming very frustrated. She maintained the status quo for another month and then finally decided to just make the most of whatever it was that David would offer. If he didn't want to have sex with her because of her relationship with Ryan, then that was his loss. If he wanted a sexless relationship, then that is what they would have. She would express her love for him in other ways and take from him whatever he gave. It was that fateful decision that started them down their final path. It was a warm Wednesday morning as Colleen parked her Lexus outside her husband's building. She picked up her purse, signed in at the guard's desk, and again made her way up to the 7th floor. It had been some time since she had been there during the day, and she had forgotten how the office bustled. Terry, David's longtime receptionist, caught sight of her as soon as she stepped off the elevator. "Mrs. Lynch, it's so good to see you again. It's been some time since you've come to see us." "Hello, Terry, it's good to see you as well." "Is he in his office?" she asked, already starting to walk that way. "Oh yes, but can I ask you to hold on? They're working with confidential documents this morning, so I'm to announce anyone that's here." "Of course." Terry picked up the phone and dialed David's extension. "Mr. Lynch, your wife is here to see you." Colleen couldn't make out the response but could hear her husband's voice coming through the handset. The brief conversation ended. "It'll just be a couple of minutes, Mrs. Lynch. He needs to secure some documents." Colleen nodded her understanding. While she waited, she looked around the office. She saw a couple of familiar faces and a couple of new faces. She noticed that Eileen's desk was empty. Eileen was David's longtime personal assistant, and Colleen assumed she was in the office with David. After a couple of minutes, David's door opened, and a beautiful woman came walking out. She was shorter than Colleen, maybe 5 feet 2 inches or 5 feet 3 inches, with long dark brown hair and a chest that threatened to burst open the buttons on her blouse. She was probably in her late 20s or early 30s. Colleen hated her immediately. "Mrs. Lynch, it's so nice to finally meet you. My name is Alana. Come on back." Colleen followed her as if she didn't know where she was going, assuming this was the protocol now. It didn't occur to her that she had made this walk with Eileen many times, though it had been a while. But Eileen was older and had been married forever, and they would chat amiably as they walked. This was different. Finally, they arrived at David's office. Alana lingered in the doorway as Colleen walked all the way in. "Thank you, Alana. Go ahead and take lunch now. We'll pick this up again at 2 o'clock. "Yes, sir," Alana responded crisply, then left the office while shutting the door behind her. "How on earth does she manage to avoid tipping over with those things? I assume you didn't come here just to say catty things about my assistant." "Your assistant? What happened to Eileen?" "She got promoted. She was the personal assistant to the owner and CEO." "Where could she have gotten promoted to?" "Executive assistant to the owner and CEO. The job was starting to get a little big for her. Actually, she just turned 60 and needed to slow down a bit, so I created a new position that would give her less responsibility and end her travel." "So that other girl will be traveling with you?" "Yes, and I find your obvious jealousy amusing and ironic, all things considered." "Why are you here, Colleen?" "To take my husband to lunch." "I see. And on a Wednesday, I notice." "Yes, though I'm not sure what that has to do with anything. You haven't shown up here during the week in probably a year." "Why now?" "Because I miss my husband, David. Because I want to spend time with him, with you. I love you, whether you believe that or not, and I wanted to see you." "All right, Colleen. They just opened a new Vietnamese place down the street that's quite good. Let's go to lunch." They walked in mostly silence with only a few random comments on things they saw as they were walking. Colleen had her hands wrapped around David's arm, and he didn't seem to mind. They were seated quickly, and the hostess greeted David by name. Colleen assumed he was a frequent visitor. They talked about nothing in particular. David suggested a couple of dishes that he thought she would like, and then they ordered lunch. Colleen reached across the table and took David's hand. She took it as a small victory that he didn't even flinch. "Do you believe that I love you, David?" "Love me? What stuff do you smoke to be in such a delusional world?" "My kind of love wonders how you could do what you did and still love me, but apparently, your kind of love allows for that. However, I'll give you credit for at least picking a halfway decent guy." "What do you mean? What could you possibly know about Ryan?" "I know quite a lot. I made it a point to know." "You had him investigated?" "Of course I did. That's how I know so much about him and how I know you go to his condo every Tuesday and Thursday like clockwork, and why I noticed you came to see me on a Wednesday so you don't miss your time with him. But like I said, at least he's not a conman or a gold digger. You may choose to be naive about this, but I won't. I have a very valuable company, and we earn a lot of money. You may have just wanted a strange dick, but... Can you keep your voice down, please? Sorry. Didn't mean to air your dirty laundry. Anyway, I had to consider that his intentions may have been less than, well, honorable. Honorable doesn't seem like the right word since he's screwing a married woman, but my point is that he seems to be in it just for the sex and has no plans to blackmail you or me. Of course not. He would never do something like that. Famous last words, Colleen. But in this case, you happen to be right. David, let's change the subject. I came here to spend time with you and talk about us. What us, Colleen? We're more roommates and friends than husband and wife. We haven't made love in nearly a year, your choice, Colleen interjected, to which David responded with a smirk, yes, my choice. It has nothing to do with your choice to cheat on me. David, so no sex, and what time we do spend together is just watching TV or being in the same room together. That's why I'm here today. I'm not happy with where things are, and I'd like to change them. Now, before you ask, I have no intention of giving up my time with Ryan, but I want to try and make the time you and I spend together the most it can be. That's what you don't seem to understand, Colleen. As long as you're seeing Ryan, it is the most that it can be. I don't accept that, David. There's no reason our marriage can't be exactly the same as it was. My time with Ryan doesn't intrude on my time with you. I don't love him, so my feelings aren't being shared with anyone. All it would take would be for you to think of my time with Ryan as no different from my time with my friends. It's just me having another interest. But it is different, Colleen. I don't object to your time with your friends because no one should have their life revolve around a single person. But I won't carry on our marriage as if nothing is happening while you screw another man. Besides, your claim that everything is the same is absurd. Earlier, there were 2 people in our marriage, now there are 3. So no, it is not the same, and it will never be the same. Your claim that you don't love him is even more disgusting. You use him only for sex. What does that make your lover boy, a toy? By the end of his rant, David's volume had risen steadily, and Colleen's efforts to get him to be quiet were fruitless. When he was done speaking, he pulled out his wallet, dropped a $50 bill on the table, and stormed out the door. Colleen quickly grabbed her things, whispered some apologies to those around her without noticing the looks of distaste they were giving her, and quickly left the restaurant herself. She looked in the direction of David's office and saw him walking some distance away and with a full head of steam. She knew she would never catch him, so she just took her time and walked back to her car. She struggled to keep herself together long enough to get into her car, but as soon as the door was closed, she broke down crying. She simply couldn't understand this. There was no reason at all for her relationship with Ryan to have any effect whatsoever on her marriage. Joan and the other ladies all had lovers and were still happily married. Why on earth was she having such difficulty? She wondered if she should talk with her friends about it, but ultimately decided to put that idea off, at least for now. She wouldn't want them to think she had botched something they had managed so seamlessly. She returned home and showered in the afternoon, as was now her routine. She needed to follow her established pattern because she didn't want David to believe that she had turned to Ryan for comfort following their altercation. She took some time to get dressed, hoping that once her husband had calmed down, they could carry on a more civil conversation. The fact remained that this would need to be handled. They were unable to carry on as they had. David arrived home almost 9 o'clock at night. Colleen fixed herself some dinner and did some light house cleaning since he had the courtesy to let her know he would be late tonight. She primarily did that to occupy her time while she awaited her husband's arrival. "David, can we talk, please?" "I don't know what else there is to say, Colleen. You've started and maintained an extramarital affair despite my objections, continuing for nearly a year. You seem to think the problem is my objection to it rather than that you're doing it. We're not going to agree, so what's the point in having another conversation?" "Yes, okay, I understand all of that, but I still think that you and I could be more than we are. We've been together for 25 years, surely we can be more than what we've become." "We've become what we are because of your affair, Colleen. That makes no sense. David, Joan, Ellen, Gail, and Marge all have happy, loving marriages with lovers on the side to spend time with when their husbands aren't available. I fail to see why we can't accomplish the same thing." After he silently laughed, David motioned for his spouse to sit down. "You know, I spoke to their husbands when all of this started." "What about?" "When you told me clearly that you planned to stay with Ryan for the foreseeable future, I decided to ask the happy husbands for advice, thinking that if they could handle the situation and were able to accept what their wives were doing, maybe they could offer me some guidance. At first, I was willing to see if you would get this out of your system. I let you go on your dates and even meet with Ryan for your afternoon sex fest a couple of times." "David, you are so sweet. Were they able to offer any guidance?" "They did, and I've put many of them into effect." Colleen was perplexed by this since she hadn't observed anything David had done to maintain their marriage, like did you know that only Rick and Gail, out of those four couples you're trying so hard to emulate, kept having sex together once the wife took her lover? "What?" "As you can see, Joan initiated it by pursuing a romantic partner in reaction to Wendell following suit. Wendell had no relationship with her after learning the truth. I don't think it had much of an impact on him. Joan expresses their happiness all the time. Colleen, she's saving face. They rarely spend time together. When they do, it's usually just for social events where they have to look like a happy couple. They hardly talk and have separate bedrooms, from what I've been told. They converse via emails and texts. That isn't possible." The next to fall victim was Marge. It appears that she and Norm didn't have a great marriage at the moment, nothing wrong, but they were apathetic. Marge made the same decision after learning that Joan had a lover. They are still married, so I suppose Marge is happier even though their marriage didn't get any better. However, Marge has always extolled their marriage, likely for the same reason that Joan does, her own. She wanted everyone to believe that all was well. Colleen, image is one of the most important things to older, wealthy women. But they're my friends, they'd be honest with me, David. Gil was next, and Rick says he honestly tried to put it out of his mind and continue on as things were, David said with a smile. However, he claims that after a few months, it was obvious that she had grown tired of him. After having thrilling afternoon cheating sex with a new and younger man, she decided that plain old married couple sex was no longer exciting enough for her. Since then, they haven't done it. I find it hard to believe this. That my friends would mislead me in such a way about their marriages is beyond comprehension. I'm sure the husbands are just trying to make the wives look bad, and I doubt that the husbands are going without sex, I mean except for Wendell. Yes, they won't be without. They have an easy way to take care of those requirements. Well, what exactly is that? They hired personal assistants. Colleen needed some time to process the truth of that statement, but once she did, she was not fazed by Colleen's outburst. In fact, she had been anticipating it. I hired Alana not long after you gave me that speech. I was being honest when I said that Eileen needed assistance and that I was going to create a new position. In fact, Alana was the one I hired because of her business background. Her work came highly recommended, and she holds a degree in business. On her back, no doubt. Disregarding his wife's teasing, David said, for the first few months, everything was very professional between us. Her job requires that we spend a lot of time together, and we got to know each other very well. I confided in her about what you were doing after a few months. I felt so relieved to let go of the burden. It was as though a burden had been removed. That had to be around the time I noticed you were in a better mood, and I honestly believed you were turning around. From that point on, nothing was off limits. Almost everything about ourselves that could be shared was shared by us. We've grown quite close now. When did you begin harming her? Actually, not too many months ago. David continued, things had been building for some time. Unlike you, I'm not a jumping into bed with some guy I met in a coffee shop kind of person. Colleen winced noticeably at the insult. With a lot of flirting and even a hint of innuendo, we became quite relaxed with one another. Based on her actions, such as her light hand touches and shoulder-to-shoulder standing, I was fairly certain she was drawn to me. I couldn't help but be drawn to her. We stayed up late one night to complete a project. She lived alone and I didn't feel like going home, so I didn't have anywhere specific to go. I took out a few beers, and we conversed while sipping our drinks. Sitting side by side on that leather couch in my office was us. David, Jesus, you've completed it on that sofa? Just grin. All right, I believe I've heard enough. Apologies. Well, that was the beginning. I reasoned that I could succeed if you could. But you stayed late on purpose to do it, and I always do it when you're busy. As I mentioned earlier, Colleen, we've essentially become roommates. I made a decision and you made yours. David, it's not the same thing. I didn't let my time with Ryan interfere with my time with you. You can't make the same claim twice. Yes, but the situation was distinct. You left the marriage first, and I just answered. Since you were the first to do it, the truth is that you were attempting to be considerate. And I do appreciate that even though I disagree with what you did. Although Colleen had set boundaries around their relationship, she had never considered the potential impact it could have on David. She had assumed that her relationship with Ryan would remain out of sight and out of mind, but it was clearly not. Colleen was in pain and couldn't shake the image of her husband and that woman having sex. A short while later, David said, "There's something else I need to tell you, Colleen." "What is that?" she was able to whisper. "Alana has a baby. Roughly for 2 months." As if this wasn't bad enough, it had gotten even worse. Colleen's eyes widened and she sharply inhaled. Is it yours?" she let out a gasp. "She tells me that it is." "Naturally, I'll be making sure." "David, how did this happen?" With a deep breath, David said, "It was intentional." Colleen was in shock after receiving yet another blow, and she wasn't sure how much more she could handle, but she needed to know everything right away. No matter how painful it was, she had to face the facts now. "Did you intentionally knock her down? However, why?" "Colleen, we are the only owners of this extremely valuable company that I own. And I have no one to leave it with right now. When the time came, I had planned to just sell the business, but I've grown to detest that notion. Since my staff members are like family to me, I didn't want to entrust their futures to an unknown individual or, worse, a large corporation. I now intend to leave it to Alana or our infant, depending on the time." "David, are you divorcing me?" "At this time, I don't have any plans to do that. I had intended to leave things alone. Alana even paid to have a prenuptial agreement drawn up that is largely in my favor because she wants to be married to me. However, as long as we are able to spend time together, she is also fine with things continuing as they are. Thus, things stand as they are. I'll have Alana, and you can continue to see Ryan." Maybe she was naive, but Colleen never imagined things would turn out this way. This was too much. She got up, grabbed her keys and purse, and said, "David, I'm going to need some time to process all of this. I might be running very late because I'm going for a drive. Don't worry, I'll stay in contact with you via text." Colleen drove around the city, aimlessly, wondering how things had gotten to this point. Her husband had a lover of his own, and Alana was so young and pretty, with dark brown hair that was long and wavy. Colleen assumed Alana was Hispanic, but she wasn't sure beyond that. She texted David every now and then to let him know that she was still driving, and he would always reply, "Please be safe." It gave her some comfort to know that he still worried about her safety. When she finally got home at around 2 in the morning, she walked blearily into the house and found David sleeping, though he was awake and sitting up when she emerged from her closet, where her bedside lamp had been thoughtfully left on so she could see. "How are you doing, Colleen?" "I'm fine, David, but I'm worn out. Let's head to bed and discuss again tomorrow." The following day they never got around to talking, mainly because there wasn't much else to say. David left for work. Colleen went out with her friends, contemplated calling off her afternoon with Ryan, but ultimately was glad she'd gone through with it. He sensed right away that something wasn't right, and instead of an afternoon of sex, they talked for a while, and when they did, it was slow and gentle. The next few weeks went by quickly. Colleen had discovered that David was seeing Alana more often and that he was staying late at work. Although Colleen understood this, it still hurt her feelings, and she began to feel unwell, spending several evenings in bed. She'd never experienced stomach pain before, so she took this as a sign that her marriage was having a negative impact on her deeply, and she ultimately made the decision to see a doctor. Terry, the receptionist, went to stop Colleen Connor Lynch as she took the elevator on the 7th floor of her husband's office building and headed straight for his office, knowing that her boss and Alana were inside by themselves and might be in a compromised position. Colleen turned to Terry, the person she had always liked, and gently smiled at her, saying, "Langley, wait. It's okay, Terry." Terry was unable to do more than watch as Colleen proceeded down the hallway leading to her husband's office. Upon entering without knocking, she discovered Alana perched on her husband's lap as he sat in his chair. The sound of the door drew their attention, and they both turned to face it. Alana then leaped off his lap and ran into David's private restroom. "Colleen, what is going on here? How come you're here?" David said to Colleen, "We need to talk," as Alana came out of the bathroom. "Could it not have been put off until tonight?" "It might have, but since Alana is also involved, I wanted to address this here. Should we take a seat on the sofa?" Colleen extended her arm and handed David a file folder as they all took a seat, with Colleen at one end and David at the other. Alana rested her voluptuous behind on the armrest behind David. "I'm divorcing you." The expression on his face was priceless. She would have laughed at it if not for the gravity of the situation and the emotional distress she was experiencing at making this decision. "You intend to divorce me?" "Yes, David. You'll find the terms acceptable, I believe. I haven't requested any ownership in the business, but I did increase the cash payout by a small amount to make up for it." The settlement itself then wasn't a problem, rather, David's only question was why, or rather, why now? David skimmed over the terms outlined in the filing and found nothing objectionable. In fact, it was probably less than the court would have awarded her. "David, there are 2 reasons for this. But primarily because I cherish you." "You'll have to explain that." "Ever since I met you at Sheila Mullen's pool party, I have loved you. We have spent nearly 26 years together, or more than half of our lives, together since we were 17 years old. I also want you to be content." The news that she would truly get to marry the man she fell in love with made Colleen smile at Alana. "I made a bad decision and damaged us beyond repair, so I'm setting you free to be happy with Alana and your new baby." More than anything, David was shocked. "How about you, Colleen?" "Oh, your kindness will more than provide for me in the years to come. I'm excited but also a little afraid as I start a new chapter in my life." "David, a lot of women live alone. You'll be just fine, I'm sure." "That's not really what I meant to say. My time alone won't last long." They'd never had children together, preferring their time together and the freedom to just go away for a weekend. Now that their marriage was coming to an end, they were separately starting a whole new adventure, parenthood. "It seems I've gotten myself pregnant," David said, looking at his soon-to-be ex-wife in shock as the folder of papers hit the floor with a thud. David had no desire to hurt or insult Colleen, and was pleased when she accepted the question. "It's Ryan's," he said, even as he realized what he had implied. Since he hadn't had sex with his wife in months, it had to be Ryan's, unless Colleen had another lover. "What specific type of woman do you believe I am?" Though in a playful manner, and with a hint of humor, Colleen spoke. "Well, I suppose we already know the response to that." "Indeed, Ryan owns it." "Will the two of you succeed in this endeavor?" "Ryan is single and never will be. I don't love him anyway, and we would never get along." To his credit, he has been very cooperative when it comes to paying child support and hasn't tried to dispute it. "Of course, I won't need the money, but the idea is what matters." Even so, he has expressed his intention to try his best to be a good father despite his reservations. "You intend to keep the child?" "I'll be able to raise my child freely thanks to your generosity. You will also be indirectly paying for the full-time, live-in nanny I intend to have. Thus, you have undoubtedly observed that my desire was to retain the house." To my surprise, I did, but I wasn't going to fight it. "You are aware of my deep affection for that house and my desire to raise my child there. It should be a suitable size for the nanny and us." "I believe you are correct. Though it makes sense, I have to admit that Colleen, I truly never expected this." "Are your pals aware of this?" "Yes, we did have a come-to-Jesus discussion regarding their deceit and absurdity. They were sorry for guiding me in that direction, but I told them it was my decision. Though I'm still the only one filing for divorce, I suppose that counts in my favor that they finally acknowledged the truth. You know, if you ever need anything, you can call me." "I understand, but I need to get up on my own 2 feet. I travel to your house from Dad's house via college. Although I intend to do it myself, I swear I'll call if necessary." At that point, Colleen got to her feet, followed by David and Alana, gave them both a hug, and turned to head back the way she had come. Please feel free to express your opinions in the space provided for comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.